Today we're going off on a bit of a tangent. We're going to be talking about an organisation called the Kindred of the Kibbo Kift, or the KKK, who were a back to the land movement between the wars, and later became the green shirts of the Social Credit Party. They're very strange. The Kibbo Kift fit within the broader history of the British countryside through a character called Rolf Gardiner, who between the wars was very interested in folk revival through youth movements. Rolf Gardiner is fairly important because he was best friends with the main bad guy of this channel, Lord Limington, and together they go to Nazi Germany and hang out with all the big names, and Rolf Gardiner was a key figure in the development of organic farming. He was perhaps the key figure in kinship in husbandry, which was the name of the organic movement during the war, and after the war, with Lord Limington, he founded the Soil Association. These are men who wanted to return Britain to feudal times, initially politically through hijacking the Conservative government in 1933, but later by reducing the food supply with organic farming, which would get rid of all of the people in cities. Rolf Gardiner was an interesting character. Born to a comfortable background in Kensington, London in 1902 to an Austrian mother, he was a devoted Boy Scout, which at the time was quite a new thing. When sent to rugby school, he maintained this devotion, which meant he got bullied. Nevertheless, he took up life drawing as a child and started studying modern languages at Cambridge just after the First World War. While at Cambridge, he had long hair and wore a sky blue coat, and he used to go swimming naked in the River Cam, which was a practice he'd picked up from a visit to Germany. He also used to go running naked. He set up the Cambridge University Morris Dancing Society. It seems that Gardiner's interest in youth folk culture influenced the German youth movements that culminated eventually in the Hitler Youth, rather than the other way around. But importantly for today's story, while at Cambridge, Rolf Gardiner became very interested in a new economic theory called social credit. And in this, he was not alone. In the early 20th century, there were lots of different movements aiming to re-establish a connection between people and the land. One of these was the newly formed Scout movement, which contained a man called John Hargrave, who served in the First World War as a stretcher bearer before being invalided out in 1916. This experience understandably made him quite critical of the modern world, and he concluded, "Our great disorganised civilization has failed." But when Hargraves returned from the front lines back to Britain, he felt the Scout movement had become a patriotic instrument for war. Although previously a rising star in the Scout movement, he was excommunicated and instead started a rival movement in London 1920, which he called the Kindred of the Kibbo Kift. From the outset, this is very weird. Hargrave was a charismatic eccentric who intended the movement to allow people to get earth contact in a mechanical age. His followers, the kinfolk, wore a uniform called a habit, which was based on Anglo-Saxon peasant dress, and they carried totems in rituals, or alternatively wore homemade clothes with some strange shapes on them. They did outdoorsy stuff like camping and woodcraft and going on hikes, and members of the Kibbo Kift had woodcraft names. Hargrave's girlfriend went by Minobi, which meant good heart. Hargrave himself was called White Fox, Headman, or Wawawgoosh, and he had costumes to match. Hargrave was very much the leader of this movement, with any discussions ending with himself declaring, "I have spoken." Partly because there were lots of other new woodcraft groups that people could join around this time, this eccentricity from Hargraves meant that the Kibbo Kift was never a very big movement. At its peak in 1924, it hit about 230 members at its annual camp. But later that year, after a challenge to Hargraves' leadership failed, a bunch of members left to start a different group that they called the Woodland Folk. But the Kindred of the Kibbo Kift didn't really want numbers. They desired world unity and cooperation between people like them who were free from the corruption of the modern world. But they saw themselves as the elect, an elite vanguard of cultural regeneration who would establish a model that the broader population could then follow. So while this is going on, Rolf Gardiner is at Cambridge and he's just started the Social Credit Study Circle to explore a new economic philosophy. Social credit was an idea being developed by a retired army engineer, Major C.H. Douglas. Douglas felt all economic problems derived from the population's inability to buy all of the goods available for sale. Wealth was unequally distributed, so poverty was occurring while the goods required to fix the poverty were sitting idly on shelves. The banking sector was part of this problem, trading money itself as if it were a commodity. And if money was a commodity, the banks controlled the supply. They could manipulate the market to their advantage and hurt honest, productive industry in the process. Instead, Douglas believed the amount of money available should match the national wealth, which he termed the national credit. As the economy grew and the national credit increased, the money supply must also increase to allow these additional goods being produced to be purchased. Each person would receive their share of the national credit, their social credit. Social credit is a very complicated idea, but it works perhaps like the inverse of a value-added tax, where the government will pay somebody to consume an item. This meant Douglas wanted a new government department, a national credit office, to determine what the fair price for a good should be, which meant determining how much profit the manufacturer could make, and then if market prices were too high, intervening to provide social credit to effectively reduce the price. It seems like it would be very difficult to achieve this even today with computers and algorithms, so in the 1920s it was a bit ambitious. And perhaps because of that, in the 1920s, social credit was quite an obscure idea, being explored seriously in only a few pockets of the country. There was Gardiner's group in Cambridge and another in Coventry. At Cambridge, Gardiner was the editor of a student journal called Youth, aimed at promoting youth culture, and he wanted to spread his readership as far as he could, so he reached out to the Kibbo Kift in the hope that they could distribute it abroad, which they did. And then Gardiner became their European representative in 1924. But Hargrave was weary of educated people and considered Gardiner to be a novice at woodcraft. Gardiner left the organisation the following year. But this obscure folk group and the concept of social credit had collided. Although Hargrave's movement postured as almost purely cultural, he became increasingly obsessed with Douglas's ideas. If people were to return to nature and health, they would need the time and security to do so. As labour was displaced by mechanisation, social credit would see the wages of the machine added to the national credit and distributed to the people. Hargrave increasingly encouraged his followers to study social credit before announcing at the 1931 Kinfest that it was the duty of the Kibbo Kift to break the money power. Social credit came to be seen as necessary if the cultural ambitions of the Kibbo Kift were to become widespread. And while Hargrave was getting serious about social credit, the British economy was falling apart and unemployed marches were happening all over the country. In Coventry, those believing in social credit formed legions of the unemployed who wore green shirts and did drills and went on the marches. Hargrave saw that the legions of the unemployed gave direction to otherwise purposeless lives. This was similar to the social function of the Kibbo Kift, and with the shared aim of social credit, he invited the legions to Kibbo Kift events. Sensing they were onto something, Hargrave adopted the legion's quasi-paramilitary practices of drilling and patrolling, and Hargrave himself started wearing a green shirt, compelling his followers to do the same. The Legion disbanded in 1933, leaving Hargrave as the leader of the popular social credit movement and its green shirts. And through aligning with the unemployed, Hargrave's movement started to reach new heights. Hargrave found the unemployed were inclined to be quite tolerant of his folk revivalist ideas, perhaps as camping was as close to a holiday as many of them could expect. He and his followers marched with the unemployed with drums and banners, and Hargrave renamed the Kindred of the Kibbo Kift to the Social Credit Party in 1935, fielding a candidate in Leeds South for the 1935 election and polling a commendable 11% of the vote. Their inverted KK logo was rebranded to represent the key to the promised land that lay ahead once the bankers' combine had been broken and social credit replaced capitalism. A green shirt named Michael Murphy even put a green painted brick through the window of 11 Downing Street with the slogan "All power to the green shirts" written on it. Here he is being arrested. He was awarded the Green Oak Leaf for his heroism. But while this stunt provided publicity, it didn't generate much endorsement. But although the Green Shirts had become a political movement, they are very difficult to place politically. Their insistence on security for industrial workers and their embracing of technological advancements distances them from neo-feudalist visions like Leamington's or Gardiner's. But their ideas also changed over time. In embracing social credit, Hargrave wanted an economically self-sufficient nation that could pay for itself and was self-contained, which is very different from the small government, folk-based world unity that the Kibbo Kift tried to pursue. Even while the Kibbo Kift wanted world unity, they were very hierarchical. They considered themselves an elite vanguard. And even the Green Shirts maintained that monarchy was necessary, as a king would be needed to stand against the interests of the money power that would inevitably try to take over the state. Yet despite this elitism, they seem not to have picked on any specific minorities, actively campaigning against racist theories and anti-Semitism. Hargrave insisted that the social credit movement was a third way, neither communist or fascist. But as the communists and fascists were also political movements that had men on the streets, the emergence of a new rival in the Green Shirts seems not to have gone down well, with the social creditors often getting beaten up. Despite the differences between Hargrave's movement and Gardiner and Leamington's ideas, the Green Shirts were closer to their view of an English fascism than Oswald Mosley's Black Shirts of the BUF. Gardiner was very dismissive of Mosley's rallies, saying they were superficial posturing. In Gardiner's view, a fascist society must be natural and would need much deeper roots. The folk revivalist and anti-capitalist origins of the Green Shirts were shared values, a point of contact with the organic movement. But as you might expect, the Green Shirts' shift towards a paramilitary presenting organisation didn't go down very well in the media. Some of their marches had seen their supporters number in the thousands, but ultimately Hargrave's attempt at a popular folk revival movement spluttered out. Political uniforms were banned in 1937 and the decline in unemployment took the wind out of the movement. Operations were suspended during the Second World War and the Social Credit Party was officially disbanded in 1951. So were the Green Shirts the bad guys? I think probably not, which is very easy to say because they seem almost forgotten and ultimately not very important. But they did diverge from the organic movement and Rolf Gardiner in a very important way. The organic movement wanted to take us back into feudalism, whereas the social credit movement was quite happy to take us forwards. Hargrave was not against progress or mechanisation. He saw social credit as a path to a post-industrial society where people had the space and freedom to reconnect with nature. But Rolf Gardiner saw the Tudor period as the peak of English cultural life, and most of his friends in the organic movement thought the Dark Ages were even better. So while there are similarities and links here through characters like Rolf Gardiner, the Kibbo Kift seemed to be progressive, where the organic movement were conservative, almost to the point of absurdity. And that, I think, is a very important difference. And this is a distinction that seems to have been clear at the time. D.H. Lawrence, Gardiner's hero poet, wrote to Rolf Gardiner of the Green Shirts that the ideas are sound but won't work until a great deal of flesh and blood has been destroyed. I think this shows that even sympathetic onlookers within the organic movement, who also wanted a revival of folk culture within England, generally rejected the progressive elements of the social credit movement and instead demanded a reduction in population. And that is the sort of thing that bad guys want. I defer to my comment section to make an informed comparison between social credit and modern ideas regarding universal basic income. Don't forget to subscribe and do come back next week where we'll be discussing something that either has happened or is happening. I'll see you then.